further statements on the 10th anniversary of the apology to Australia's Indigenous peoples.
Are there any statements? I give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. I was fortunate, I've had the honour to be in the Federal Parliament the day that Kevin Rudd expressed his apology on behalf of the nation to the stolen generations. And there's no doubt it was a euphoric occasion, marked on the one hand by great sadness but also happiness that at last the nation had come to terms with the abhorrent and sorry policies of past governments. The hideousness of it all was, of course, that we had to wait so long. And the fact that the previous Howard government just resisted the idea of having an apology, saying sorry, and talking about a black armband view of history. Now, those of us who had the honour of being there that day, and those around the nation who saw the tears of expression coming from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who were members of the stolen generation and their families, left us, I think, feeling that things had changed. And things did change. But still there is work to be done, and I will come to that in a moment. We can't run away from our sorry history. We shouldn't run away from our sorry history. We need to acknowledge that history and understand there is still work to be done, and that in the context of the Northern Territory in particular, and indeed the ACT and Jervis Bay, we, the Commonwealth, need to compensate those surviving members of the stolen generation, something which we in Labor are committed to doing. But let's just go back a bit, if I may, just to remind ourselves that between the 1890s to the 1970s, Aboriginal children were stolen from their families. It included many where one parent was an Aboriginal person. Between 1905 and 1969, it's estimated that 1 in 10 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were stolen. Over the years of these policies, it's estimated that over 2,000 Aboriginal kids in the Northern Territory were removed from their families by government officers and taken to 7 different missions. Throughout all of this period, the Northern Territory was governed by the Commonwealth. Children were removed from their families at any age. Between 1.5 and 2/3 of children forcibly removed were taken before the age of 5 years. Can you just imagine? Can you have it in your mind, if you are a parent, the horror of children being taken without consultation, without agreement, without any reasonable approach, without concession, and the parents and mothers in particular left without hope. Sadly, this was the plight of far, far too many. And we're still wearing the consequences of that. The intergenerational trauma that still exists in families where parents were stolen, and grandparents for that matter. Children were taken away, they were trained to be domestic servants, they were cheap labour, they were abused emotionally and sexually many. 1 in 6 girls ran away, 1 in 11 girls became pregnant while apprenticed, 1 in 12 died. All of this because of abhorrent racism. No other explanation is required. You know, this was about smoothing the pillow of the dying race. It was a classic assimilationist policy post-Second World War. And today in the Northern Territory, we estimate around 400 surviving members of the stolen generations. One of those, about whom I want to speak briefly, is Barbara Cummings. Now, 35 years ago, Barbara, along with others, was a primary mover and instigator for a conference at the Cormilda College, at which I was present, which was the first occasion that members of the stolen generations from across the Northern Territory were brought together. This was very important. It led to the Long Road Home. It led to a book which Barbara was responsible for Take This Child, a story of children in institutions in the Territory, such as Retta Dixon, where she herself and many of her friends were institutionalised. Barbara fought for her whole adult life to have stolen generations properly recognised by governments of all political persuasions, and to have compensation, not just symbolism, but compensation for that stolen generation. Sadly, much to our disgrace really, she wasn't present with the Rudd apology here in this Parliament, which was such an important event in our history. And sadly also, Barbara is now in declining health. I'd like to think that whilst she's able to understand what we're doing, that this Parliament has the good grace to finally pass an act for compensation for Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory and the Territories, ACT and Jervis Bay, who were stolen. Surely to goodness we can finally do that. And I plead to the government, why don't you just do it? Why don't you just do it? And there are many others, members of the stolen generations, with whom I'm very close, some of whom have passed away in the struggle, taken the Commonwealth to the High Court. People like, and I won't mention their full name, but Mr Kruger, Mrs Cabillo and Mr Gunner, they lost their cases. Others, such as Harold Thomas in the top end, Harold Ferber in Central Australia, still fighting for the recognition that members of the stolen generation so properly deserve. I know of others, one of whom was my own staff member, a non-Aboriginal person, Jack Crosby, who with his partner Sue Roman was primarily involved in instigating a case where the children from Retta Dixon, as a result of the Royal Commission into Child Abuse, were able to take the Commonwealth to court over its failure of duty of care. And that, to my knowledge, was the only occasion when members of the stolen generations in the Northern Territory have had their case recognised for this question of duty of care and have been compensated as a result of a court ruling. Really quite important. Not volunteered by the Commonwealth, I might say, much to our disgrace, but something which was so very important to them. Jack sadly passed away not too long ago, but he was a very close personal friend. Now, I'm pleased to say, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, that the Shorten Labor team, we've committed ourselves to establishing a compensation scheme for survivors of the stolen generations in Commonwealth jurisdictions. And that compensation scheme will provide an ex gratia payment of $75,000. We'll also establish a funeral assistance fund for members of the stolen generation of $7,000 to assist with the cost of funerals. And we will also establish a $10 million National Healing Fund to support healing for the stolen generations and their families in recognition of the intergenerational effects of forced removal, something which is yet to be properly understood by the majority of the population, but something which comes home to me almost daily. And to try and respond to the unacceptably high rates of Indigenous children currently and children of First Nations peoples currently in out-of-home care, the Shorten Labor government will convene a national summit on First Nations children in our first 100 days. Now, these are very, very important initiatives, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, and something I'm very proud to associate myself with. In many respects, for many, they've come too late because so many of the stolen generations have passed. But we, as a nation, it is not too late for us to finish the journey that we've embarked upon as a result of the apology. And I want to acknowledge the leadership of Kevin Rudd at the time of the apology and just reiterate how sad it is that we had to wait so long for that recognition. It's not a question of an understanding or accepting a black armband view of history. It's about acknowledging our past, understanding the absurdity, the stupidity, the danger, the cruelty of past government policies, and accepting that we as a Commonwealth are responsible, and that as a responsible Commonwealth we should legitimately pay compensation to those who are affected.